Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about recovery coaching and the difference between recovery coaching and therapy. Because if you are on my channel for a while now, you know my story and you might have heard that I also worked with a recovery coach, which was actually pretty helpful to me. So I want to talk about recovery coaching, about the pros and cons, if recovery coaching is the right choice for you, and if not, why that is, also what other options you have, basically cover the whole topic. So let's start and get right into it. So when I moved to New York, pretty much 2 years and a couple of months ago, I started recovery coaching. I actually wanted to work with a pretty internet famous coach, and I'm still a huge fan of her work. I think she's amazing, and I'm pretty sure she helps a lot of people. But she wouldn't take me in because I was still at a very low weight. I was not at my lowest weight, but I was still at a low weight. And even though she's a person that doesn't concentrate on weight, she has the HAES approach, which I honestly pretty much think is the right thing to do. It's health at every size. But she is a person that makes sure that people have a minimum weight, even though she always points out that she doesn't want to concentrate on weight, which I think it's more than fine, honestly. I think that's something I would do too, just to be on the safe side. Also, as somebody who had an eating disorder for so long, I actually know that your brain works very differently when you're underweight. And so that didn't work out. We had a consultation call and she basically told me, hey, I would love to work with you, but I'm sorry, you have to put on more weight first. And it made me a little bit mad at that situation, if I'm being completely honest, because I was like, well, that's why I'm reaching out to you. Like, I want you to help me gain weight. But of course, there's nothing she could do about it. And I completely respect that. I then reached out to another, like, it's called an eating disorder clinic, but they actually mainly do outpatient coaching, and so we scheduled online lessons, and I work with an amazing coach. She actually, the first person I wanted to work with was a recovered anorexic, and I actually thought that was a good thing because I've been following her for like 12 years on social media now. And I love her work. I love how she shares her own experience, and she's like pretty much super stable. And so I was a little bit insecure about working with somebody who did never have an eating disorder themselves. But on the other hand, it also has some pro sides because the person I worked with grew up with a very healthy relationship to food and her body. We started working with each other. I remember the first session, she pulled out a book and she was like, that might be helpful. I was like, I have it right here. I read it. I worked through it. I did all the exercises. She was like, oh, okay. I have this book as well. I was like, I read it as well. She was like, oh, wow. So you're actually pretty much aware. I was like, yes. I'm super aware. I'm like a little bit too aware actually, but I just can't make the changes. So we started working together. She started with like very small steps. For me, that meant having breakfast in the morning without counting calories. I mean, having breakfast overall was something I hadn't done in like many, many years. And then also without counting calories. And we worked through the first, I would say, 2 months of my eating disorder recovery together. And when I fell into a deep depression, I simply didn't have the energy and the motivation to reach out to her anymore, to be completely honest. But it was very helpful to work with her. So let's talk about eating disorder recovery coaching and what it means, what the differences to like classical therapy are, so that you guys get a little idea of if that would be a good approach for you. So eating disorder coaching, as the name says, concentrates on the active recovery from an eating disorder, whether that's anorexia, binge eating, bulimia. As you guys know, I don't love to label these because all of the eating disorders pretty much go hand in hand, even though the habits might be different from each other. But if you're working with an eating disorder coach, they might be trained in it. There are a lot of great classes out there to train people, but of course it's always an individual thing, right? You can work with a therapist and it might work out great. You can work with somebody and notice, oh, we're just not a good fit. Same goes with coaches, of course, because whenever we have interpersonal interactions, there's always a slight chance of that it's not compatible, basically. Eating disorder coaches mainly concentrate on forming new, healthier habits, on getting rid of the rigidity of eating disorders or of the habits that you want to get rid of. If you're working, I mean, that's like my personal opinion, but if you're working with a good recovery coach, they will also make sure that you never ever restrict yourself. I don't care if it's like binge eating disorder or not, they will make sure that there is no restriction involved, because this can be a huge trigger for binges actually. But back to my story. So, as you know, I recovered from anorexia. So, we slowly made changes. And for me, it was super helpful to talk to someone who was compassionate and who had heard it all. Because I was very ashamed of my habits and of the things I would do. But with her, I felt like I could share it because she had heard it all already. And if you're working with somebody who had an eating disorder themselves, chances are also that they know what you're talking about. So it's a pretty safe space. Um, that allows you to share your experiences without having the feeling of being ashamed or without feeling misunderstood, because when we're talking to our friends or families, they might try to listen and they might try to understand us, but if they haven't been through it or if they haven't done the work with other people, they might not understand. So the baseline is actually recovery coaches concentrate more on the habits than on the why. Of course, you can talk to your coach about certain things, about, for instance, how like certain habits of your family members influence you or stuff like this. But overall, they're going to concentrate more on how to create healthier habits and not so much on the why. The why is oftentimes a therapist's work, like analyzing your childhood, analyzing your traumas, whatever it is. I'm not saying like sometimes there is no clear line, and sometimes your recovery coach also might, talk to you about some more personal things, and it can be very helpful. But like overall, they're gonna concentrate on forming healthier habits with you. And of course, recovery coaches work with clients every day, so they have a lot of background knowledge. From my own experience, I learned that many therapists, as good as they are, don't know a lot about eating disorders, because at least in Germany, there is no such thing as an eating disorder therapist. There might be people that like concentrate on working with people with eating disorders, for instance, in clinics, but there is no certain, studies in school. And when I talked to my friend recently who studied psychology, she was like, yeah, we talked about eating disorders, but we never went into deep. So when I told her about certain things and about the science that I also am writing about in my book, which is going to come out this week in Germany and soon in America as well, she was like, I didn't even know that. Like, I studied 6 years and I have never heard of it. So eating disorder recovery coaches will probably have more experience than a therapist, which can be super helpful. The thing that helped me pretty much are constant reminders and motivations. Cause I mean, if you like go to therapy once a week or even twice a week, of course the therapist might work with motivation as well, but a recovery coach will constantly remind you of your why. As my coach did, she constantly reminded me of how miserable I was, how miserable I felt, how much I wanted to change. I mentioned the point of no return in one of my old videos, so that was basically something that pretty much changed my whole perspective, because I was like, yeah, like now I already started it. Yes, I feel miserable, but I started this because I want to recover. So I'm at the point of no return. I'm not gonna go back. And many recovery coaches also work with WhatsApp or have like an emergency number. Even if you don't have a session scheduled, you can reach out to them. You can also share your wins with them, which is super important as well. Like, hey, I went to the coffee shop today and I actually grabbed a croissant. Something like that. Send them a picture. All these things, like during the day, during the week, can be super helpful during recovery, especially when you're struggling. Got a little visitor here. I hope you guys don't mind. So yeah. And so, as I mentioned before, recovery coaches might not want to take you in. You have to be aware that certain therapists might also not want to take you in. When I moved to the town where I studied at, I saw a couple of therapists for like take-ins or like, first time lessons. And I had two people turn me down and were like, I'm not going to work with you because you're not stable enough, because you basically are too underweight. I then found a therapist who wanted to work with me. He always said, we're not on the market, I'm not going to concentrate on your weight too much, and was pretty helpful. But again, our brains work very differently when we're underweight. So you have to be aware that this can happen with therapists as with coaches as well, of course. I think these other recovery coaches are, I want to say, pretty much always self-paid. I mean, there might be exceptions, but since it's different than a college degree, insurance won't pay for it. So this is actually something to take a look at, and it's very important because, of course, first of all, it's completely worth it. I saw all the prices, and when I was like still in the depth of my eating disorder and I struggled with spending money, I was like, oh my god, that's so much money. Honestly, it is more than valid. Like, the sessions mainly move between $100 up to like $250 an hour, which is again more than fair. But you have to make sure that you are able to pay that, because you don't want to get started and then have to stop after 5 weeks because your money is running out, right? And I get it, it is super hard. It's unfair, of course, because you want to work with a coach, you want to get better, and it's like a money issue. But just be aware and like don't start if you don't know if you can continue it, because that would be like actually pretty sad for both sides. Like if I imagine being a coach and I start working with a client and then I have to stop after a couple of weeks, even though they are making progress, that's something you want to try to avoid. Another thing that is very important, and you have to be honest with yourself about it, is that eating disorder recovery coaching might not be enough on its own. So, as I told you before about myself, when I started recovery, I actually fell into a very deep depression, and I never thought that would happen, but it did. And so I actually needed to become stable again, even though my body was a little bit more stable, but my mental health was not overall, right? So maybe recovery coaching is just not enough. Maybe you want to add therapy sessions, especially if there's trauma involved. In the end, we all have some kind of trauma, but it just feels different for different people. So even if you have a great coach and you start working on your habits, it might not be enough, because as I said before, I'm the best example for it. Getting rid of your eating disorder won't mean you don't have any other mental health issues. And the last point I want to get into is you have to do the work yourself. Again, like in therapy as well, but I feel like therapy oftentimes is more like a conversation. Somebody is mirroring you, your emotions, your reactions, your fears, all that kind of stuff, which a recovery coach will do as well, of course. When I talk to people and they're like, well, for instance, I talked to someone once and they were like, I had a burger the other day, but I went with a lettuce wrap because I just prefer it more. And I was like, you're recovering from an eating disorder. I won't believe you if you say you prefer to have a lettuce wrap. I'm not going to shame people who actually really prefer that, but if we're completely honest, that was not the case. And of course, we worked through it, and in the end, I was like, okay, that was not a reason for you to order that kind of dish. But you have to do the work yourself, of course. A recovery coach is just as good as your work with them is. So if you decide on different tasks, on different quote unquote homeworks, you want to make sure you at least try it. I'm not saying that it's failing if you can't do a certain task. And if a recovery coach makes you feel like a failure, you should look for someone else. But you have to be aware that there is nobody on this world that will heal you. There is nobody on this world that will give you the magic pill or the magic quote that will, lead to the click in your mind, because there simply is no click. It's clearly a journey, it's clearly a battle, but you have to be aware that you have to be willing to put in the work. If you choose recovery coaching to please someone else, to please your partner, your friend, your parents, it's not going to work. You have to be willing to do it yourself, even if you feel like you don't on some days. I talked about that as well. Like sometimes we feel like we don't want to recover, but the baseline has to be that you have to do it for yourself. So I hope that helped a little bit with navigating in the recovery space. Again, you can always schedule test lessons. You can always talk to different coaches to see who's the best fit for you, which approach works best for you. I just wanted to give you a little overview about your options. Of course, there are more options out there, but since I work with a recovery coach, I'm currently working on becoming a recovery coach my own, and I also work with a lot of therapists out there. I feel like I've seen a lot, and I just wanted to give you guys a little overview. Again, my books are coming out in Germany this week and then in America in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested in that, I'm gonna link the links to the books as soon as they're out. I really appreciate you guys' support. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate every single subscriber. We've been able to grow this account to 90 followers in pretty much a month. So thank you guys. I can't wait to continue this journey with you. More topics are coming, and I will see you in the next one.